This presentation will go over the Taylor, Bean and Whitaker scandal that occurred from 2002 to 2009. Taylor, Bean and Whitaker started off as a small-town mortgage firm in 1982. The owner of the company is Lee Bentley Farkas of Ocala, Florida. The company became one of the largest privately held mortgage firms of their time. Some of the leadership involved in the scandal is Paul Allen, Raymond Bauman, Desiree Brown, Catherine Kissick, Teresa Kelly, and Sean Ragland, which all held high positions within Taylor, Bean and Whitaker and Colonial Bank. Colonial Bank was also part of the scandal. The Taylor, Bean and Whitaker scandal all began when Taylor, Bean and Whitaker overdrew their accounts by a couple $1 million. To hide these overdrafts, Taylor, Bean and Whitaker and Colonial Bank transferred money to and from each account. As the overdrafts became larger amounts, Taylor, Bean and Whitaker decided to have Colonial Bank begin buying mortgage loans that had already been sold to other investors and lenders. They continued this process by selling fraudulent loans to Colonial Bank from 2002 to 2009 and created a lot of fake pool loans. Farkas had caused Colonial Bank to report these loans on their own financial reports. Taylor, Bean and Whitaker also diverted funds from Ocala funding to cover operating expenses. The scandal was discovered when Colonial Bank applied for a $553 million funding from Troubled Asset Relief Program, also known as TARP. TARP agreed to pay the funds to Colonial Bank as long as they could raise $300 million from outside investors. Taylor, Bean and Whitaker agreed to invest $150 million to Colonial Bank, and Colonial Bank could fundraise for the remainder of that. Taylor, Bean and Whitaker at the same time also was acquiring a majority stake of Colonial Bank, and ironically for the same amount of $300 million. Colonial's fundraising methods and Taylor, Bean and Whitaker's attempt to acquire Colonial Bank rose many red flags for Special Inspector General for TARP. Due to those red flags, SIGTARP decided to raid Taylor, Bean and Whitaker's headquarters in Ocala, Florida, and investigated their acquisition in Colonial Bank. During this time, they discovered fraudulent loans that amounted to $1.4 million from Colonial Bank's Mortgage Warehouse Lending Division and $1.5 million from Ocala Funding, which was operated and controlled by Taylor, Bean and Whitaker. Due to all this, they decided that it was best for Taylor, Bean and Whitaker to go bankrupt, so they decided to do that, and Colonial Bank had to cease all operations due to this fraudulent and scandal. Lee Bentley Farkas and the 6 co-conspirators had pled guilty to all these charges, and Farkas was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The auditing firm for Taylor, Bean and Whitaker was Deloitte, and the auditing firm for Colonial Bank was PricewaterhouseCoopers. The auditors failed when they didn't inspect loan files at Colonial Bank, they didn't follow up on the logical dates on Colonial's financial reports, they didn't inspect collateral backings of the mortgages, and they didn't do any quality control checks. PricewaterhouseCoopers fought a lawsuit that claimed that the auditing firm failed to detect fraud. They settled that in 2016. Deloitte settled their lawsuit in 2013 quietly. The auditing firms could have done many things differently, and some of those things do include sending out confirmations of those loan and mortgages, performing a physical inspection of those loans and mortgages, and also vouching for transactions back to their original documents. Through all of my research, I have not been able to find any changes to the accounting world due to this specific scandal. Some additional facts that I found during my research on Taylor, Bean and Whitaker was that Lee Bentley Farkas was actually just released from prison here earlier this year in 2020. After serving only 9 years in prison, he petitioned the court after he had some COVID concerns. The other thing was the slogan for Taylor, Bean and Whitaker is perfecting the art of mortgage lending, which is quite ironic in my opinion.